as a franchisor, how do you fulfill the promises you make in your FDD? And the reality, the truth comes down to there's so many emerging franchisors. You're building your system, operations manual, training procedures, but many times there's a disconnect, and many times franchisors don't fully understand what their FDD is promising, both legally, operationally, and training. That's what we're going to discuss coming up next. Kelley, we have so many conversations, and you keep pointing out to me that, Charles, when we're speaking to so many franchisors, especially ones that have been doing this for a couple of years, many times people don't fully understand what's in their FDD, what's expected. You have real world experience. How do you frame this up? And what were some of your experiences?
Yeah, I think it's probably more telling to me now that I'm on this side of the table, how little a lot of franchisors, myself included at the time, know what is going into the FDD. We're really involved in the process, especially if you're a client of Internicola, very immersed in that process, but there is still so much boilerplate language and so many things in there that, are guarantees we're making. And I think more often than not, we see the FDD. A lot of people look at the FDD as a contract that the franchisee is signing with us. And that's certainly true, but it's also a contract that we're signing with them. And there's a lot of promises we're making in there as well.
So right, as franchise lawyers, we're looking at the FDD. What are the fees we're charging? What are the contract provisions? So all of those legal items, but then operationally, Kelley, if we could focus on items 11 and 12, really in terms of training, initial training, ongoing training obligations, how we set up territories. What's some of your advice as to how franchisors should be viewing their FDD, understanding their training and support obligations, amplifying them in operations manual, and really connecting all these things?
I think one of the biggest things is, as much as humanly possible, to think forward. That was definitely a limiting factor that we had when we first started, is we underdefined what grand opening training would be. We said it would take 5 days. In reality, it took 2 weeks. We estimated that franchisees would pay this lower cost for the training. Well, with inflation, that went up substantially. And I think one of the things that I didn't fully understand when I started franchising, and I talk to a lot of franchisors now who are facing this as well, is our franchisees are only held to their version of the franchise agreement. And so, when you come in later and we try to make sweeping changes to training costs, to training modalities, if we had a franchisee sign early on with a different variation, that's how we're holding them accountable. So, that first version, whatever version of the FDD you're working on this year at renewal, try to make sure that that's going to cover you in the future as well, and not restrict your ability to make adjustments to things like training, cost, and territory.
And so those are things I want to focus on. That initial training, ongoing training. One item is that initial marketing, grand opening marketing. But even before we get there, Kelley, what were some of the biggest surprises for you as a franchisor as you're growing, where the disconnects were?
Initially it was training. And I think this is the case for a lot of franchisors. I don't think we were unique here, but especially franchisors who are in that founder seat, who have operated their local business for a number of years, maybe opened up multiple corporate locations. I think we underestimate the amount of support someone else will need that hasn't been working in that brand for 10 years, hasn't opened multiple stores. And so as we're going through that process of, how long would it take to teach them about this? How much long will it take to teach them about this? We are skipping so many steps and so many core principles that we just assume people know about. And so for us, that was definitely, as I said, we thought, this is going to be a 5-day training. No, I mean, pretty quick it went to 2 weeks, pretty quick it went to 4, to really make sure people were prepared. And that was really limiting, for those early adopters that we didn't understand what that looked like.
And Kelley, I'd like to just show the most irrelevant comment of the day. And that's Nick Powell's. Thank you, Nick, for the most irrelevant comment of the day. Glad Nick is there. If he wants, he could join us. Right. Kelley, so on the initial training, like someone watching this live stream or the video, what's some advice on, hey, I should be reviewing my training in the FDD, reviewing my operations manual. What are some real world, like come to reality questions that they need to focus on now and maybe start building a better plan?
I think the biggest one is to remember you're not training someone to work in the industry you were in. You're training someone to run a business. I think, we naturally, in my case, it was a dog training system. We are so focused on building out the training process of training dogs, of booking appointments, but we forgot that a lot of these people also don't know how to apply for an LLC. They don't know what types of insurances they need. They've maybe never run a P&L. And so really looking at your business in a more holistic fashion, not just the service you're providing, but how do you get good operators? And what are those qualities, those things that you do every day that make your location successful? How do we train those into somebody else?
So Kelley, connecting initial training, one big frustration that emerging franchisors have, and it has to do with initial marketing. And so what we'll hear often is, hey, I have franchisees that are up and running. They're not following the marketing plan. They're not investing in the marketing. That's why they're not performing well. They refuse to invest the capital. And, when we're speaking with clients, many times it's, as a franchisor, you need to be way ahead of this. I happen to think so many franchisors, they underestimate initial marketing investment. They don't have a clear plan in the FDD of how the monies are going to be spent, right? It's just franchisee needs to spend X dollars. And what we're finding is if you don't have a clear plan, they're not going to have the buy-in, and then they're not going to invest in the marketing. And we've had conversations with clients of take the marketing all up front and deploy it. What was your experience with the initial marketing with franchisees?
The exact same experience we see over and over again. Before we were taking the marketing and spending it on their behalf, we were pretty constantly seeing franchisees try to cut corners, try to do different marketing. And it's human nature. I mean, they've just dumped a whole lot of money into this company. They're trying to cut corners where they can and don't really see the value of the marketing yet because they haven't done the marketing yet. And I also think as a franchisor, this is a lot of, where we come in and think we know best, but we don't. For most of us, I was definitely the case for me. I knew how to market in my market. And I learned very quickly that it was different to market in Texas than it was in Utah, and different in New York than it was in Florida. So, despite his jabs at my background, this is where I'm going to plug someone like Nick. And that was actually huge for us, bringing on a company like 1851 who, mainland, who built out what that marketing plan would look like for each franchisee and was able to deploy the money in a way that made sense. Because I don't know about most of the franchisors on the call, but I certainly was not a marketing specialist, and that was not where my time was best spent.
Kelley, what for franchisors out there that have these standard provisions where, say, a franchisee will invest X dollars over the first 3 months and maybe, $15,000 in initial marketing. Do you recommend, because a lot of FDDs are just very, and by design, they're not detailed on what's going to happen with the marketing. What would you recommend franchisors do to really inoculate teach and train franchisees that this is going to happen. You need to have those funds ready, and we're going to go with this.
Yeah, I think, requiring them up front, making it clear when you make your franchise, when you sign, you're paying your franchise fee, but you're also paying your onboarding fee, your marketing fee, all those things are being collected. But I think also having a clear marketing plan and a clear marketing manual, having a marketing company actually handle the training on that. That was one of the things that really was a game changer for us, was allowing the marketing specialist to actually work directly with the franchisees as well, and take over that portion of the training, that portion of the education, to free us up to be able to focus more on the operational support.
I think that's a great point. Do you do that as part of your initial training? So
We did.
marketing team.
Mm-hmm.
And what did that look like? What were some of the things they were covering with franchisees?
So we covered everything from SEO to, at the time, AdWords was huge. AdWords and social, grand opening events. And so each franchisee during their onboarding experience would get that dedicated time with our marketing team to create their unique plan. Some of it was deployed obviously earlier than that, and they'd have online meetings ahead of time for website and SEO, those sort of things. But making that part of the onboarding sequence, so it didn't seem like an add-on. It was just part of the opening of your business process.
And with that marketing vendor, were franchisees contracting with them long-term, grand opening, and as they went along, or how did that work?
Yes, it was actually a required vendor of ours. And so, yeah, they continued to work with them throughout the term of their franchise agreement.
And then Kelley, so training, marketing, territory structures, item 12, setting up territories, mapping territories. What was your experience there between FDD, reality, your best practices?
Territory was definitely another one we kind of stepped in it in the beginning, because we didn't have a clear understanding of what our territory structure should be. Again, I know I talked to a lot of franchisors that are in the same place, where our territory we were operating in technically was probably 10 to 15 units. And so as we're trying to separate and we're trying to figure out where our sales were, which were obviously more central to where we were spending marketing dollars, but we were also having sales up here. So that original, how do we divide these territories? Again, marketing spend, if we had that better defined for ourselves, would have made that easier. But that set us up to give way too large of territories in the beginning. And, one of those things that you don't think about in the time, you're like, that's not a big deal. It's not really going to affect me. Well, it is absolutely going to affect you if that person is a great performer and keeps buying more territory at the original territory size you gave them. They can eat up an entire market really, really quickly, where you could have had 15 owners and now you have, 2. And so that's definitely something going back in time, I would have, brought in some outside resources, marketing teams, to help me better define that territory size.
And you've seen it in the calls. I think this is where so many emerging brands can actually destroy enterprise and long-term value, which is come out of the gate, their item 12 and even item 5 on what initial fees they charge, they're getting the territory structure wrong. So some of the things we'll hear some of the things we'll see is a brand, is on a 4-year growth trajectory. We're working with them, and from the unit economics, enterprise value, you realize the territories were too big, right? And what are some signals there? Number one, we're seeing smaller territories performing the same or even better than larger so-called territories. And then the bigger concern becomes, what does the future of the franchise system look like if we've given out these giant blocks of territory? Not only have we given them out, they're underperforming, right?
Yeah.
And so aside from, protective measures like minimum royalties and stuff like that, many of the clients that come to us as existing franchisors, we're reworking the territory structure. And it's not really taking away from future franchisees. It's being rational about the territory they're getting and allowing them to perform. So from a legal perspective, I see it as so big. For the franchisors watching this, I'll say another thing, which is consider that the territory size and structure you promise in the FDD, in item 12, potentially in item 5 also, number one, can be customized to your business. It doesn't have to be this generic X number of miles or Y number of population. When working with our clients, you could customize it. There may be, for your service or product, certain parts of the country where there's more demand or more concentration. And so you could create a flexible structure. That's one. But two, understand that the FDD should represent the minimum standard, meaning when you award a franchise, you're not giving less than that. So you can give more. And when you're giving more, though, you need to be consistent among your franchisees. A markets, B markets, C markets, downtown markets, that you're awarding on a consistent basis, similar demographics. I think franchisors do get that wrong. I think they over-index on what's promised in the FDD, and that really should be just a minimum standard. And then the other factor becomes a lot of franchisors experience or find that they could have done a better job identifying in the FDD how they set up territories. And then, of course, the mapping and everything else. But, I mean, we have a number of brands right now. And they're doing really well, but we're reworking territory structures, right?
Yeah, it's important. All territories are not created equal. And that's another, I mean, I feel like I keep making supplier plugs and telling all the franchisors not to do all this stuff yourself, but don't do all this stuff yourself. Is mapping is such an important one. Demographic mapping. I mean, it was a game changer for us because, to your point, once we kind of narrowed in that our populations weren't just, our territory wasn't just based on a population, it was based on a population with these very specific sub demographics. We were able to award much better territories, more evenly distributed territories, and see more of our franchisees successful. But we never would have been able to do that clicking around in Google Maps or going to citydata.com and drawing on. I know that's how I did it at first. And it really, did not create an equal playing field for all of the initial franchisees, which can have some negative effects on your item 19 as well, when you're trying to figure out why some people are outperforming others, and it can just come down to demographics of territory.
Right, and which connects to the initial marketing, ongoing marketing. And, we've heard it so many times. Hey, Charles, our 5 territory franchisees perform the same as our 2 territory. And so those are big factors. And of course, we need to align it with the FDD. Kelley, one area, it's not like an exciting area, and I don't know how much you came across it, but as franchise lawyers, when we're developing an FDD, we get a little paranoid. What are some fee structures that the franchisor may want to implement in the future, and how do we reserve those rights? We have your friend Kristen, and territory mapping has changed her life. I mean, yeah, no, but. So when we're talking about technology, that's where it gets to be a big challenge. So as lawyers, we're paranoid. Like, are we going to implement technology fees, or what are these other fees? And then we're implementing them in an FDD. Maybe we're saying it's X dollars, a monthly fee, or we don't currently charge a technology fee, but we reserve the right in the future. State regulators, they'll ask us a ton of questions about this. What's the maximum you could charge? What is it for? I mean, so, we see a need more and more where franchisors do have these expenses that come up. What's been your experience, or what's your opinion? What technology fees, what do franchisors really bump into down the line?
Yeah, I hit a huge roadblock with this. This brand started back in 2014, and there were not nearly as many technology options back there. We had Google Maps, like we were using G Suite and G Suite. That was it. We even had like Google Voice phone numbers. There was nothing else but G Suite. fast forward now to where there's AI and we're utilizing, all kinds of really complex CRM options. And that, we ended up, and I'm sure they still are, eating a lot of money because we didn't allow for a buffer large enough to encompass all of those. So as we were adding services, you can't go back and tell the original franchisees, well, you don't get to use this service, right? Like if it's part of your brand, it's part of your brand. But there were quite a few that don't have to pay for it either. So again, this is one of those, like when you work with the right legal team, working with the right people that help you kind of think forward, like what might happen. But as a franchisor, I also understand, how competitive franchise sales is. And, I see a lot of franchisors not wanting to have that large window of like maybe up to $1,000 a month in franchise fee, or excuse me, for the software and everything, because that's a scary number. So I don't know what the best solution is. I mean, for the franchisor, giving yourself that wiggle room is great for the tech fees, but it's also intimidating to see those big numbers, I think, sometimes in the FDD.
Which I think that creates the opportunity too. This is not about marketing, but I'll bring it up, right? We're talking about all the things that I think so many emerging brands overlook on their franchise sales website in their discovery process that are fundamental and can help with sales. What does our training look like, right? At a detailed level. Sure, we're saying you need to invest X dollars in grand opening marketing and a certain amount on ongoing marketing. But beyond that, here's our marketing partner. Here's what we're going to be discussing. Here's what the game plan looks like when we light up your business, right? And then on the technology front, what are those tech solutions? Where do they come from? And I feel like those drill down items, not that in depth in the FDD, but as part of the sales and discovery process, creates comfort for buyers.
I agree. Yeah. And I think a lot of franchisors avoid doing that because we want to look like we can do it all. We can handle it all. But I mean, coming out on the other side, if, I was looking to buy a franchise right now, I would absolutely choose a brand that's saying, we're not doing the marketing in-house. We have this marketing specialist, versus the brand who is making it seem like they're also going to handle all of my marketing, all of my tech, we all know well enough that, most people can't do it all right as an emerging brand. So to your point, let's see, who they're leaning on to provide the best support.
And Kelley, you guys collected a brand development fund or a national ad fund?
We actually never did. We had the right to, but we actually never did collect it.
So what was the thought there?
Well, the thought there was I can't possibly manage one more thing. Was the thought there? So that was a total missed opportunity. Franchisor, I'm a franchisee still. They still don't collect it. There's no real reason there other than that was one more thing we just couldn't manage.
And I think that's an important place to understand what your FDD says, your franchise agreement, because the brand development fund or national ad fund, it's really not marketing dollars. It's collective spending, should benefit franchisees equally. But I find that's an opportunity for franchisors to recoup or at least not incur costs, right? In developing some ad campaigns that could be deployed, developing centralized assets and resources. So for everyone watching this, of course, it's going to depend on what the legal structure says in your FDD and your franchise agreement, but understand that could be a very valuable resource for you as franchisor and for your franchisees. And of course, we want to be accountable to franchisees, showing they're getting good value, making a productive asset. But also think about the brand development fund. There could be efficiency there. Rather than having franchisees randomly or disparately spend their dollars, different vendors, different ideas, if you're really leading the way for your franchisees on your marketing, in-store displays, or whatever promotions, you create efficiency, you're guiding franchisees. So I think that's I think it's certainly underutilized, I think, by franchisors. and it's sort of an afterthought in the franchise development process.
I agree. We're actually working with a brand right now, and this is like that forward thinking element. One of their first franchisees, they allowed one of their negotiating items to be that they would be excluded from the brand fund collection. And now they're finally really deploying the brand fund, and the franchisor is really struggling, emotionally, with having to deploy equal dollars to his territory when he's the only one not contributing. But to your point, I mean, that's, if the FDD says you're going to equally distribute the dollars, but you allow them not to contribute, that's one of those long-term, landmines that we, as franchisors always realize we're stepping in when we're making negotiations on the franchise agreement.
Yeah, and that's one where you shouldn't be negotiating that, and you now have disclosure issues, and you're treating franchisees differently, right? And so that creates a cost for the franchisor, really. So yeah, that's definitely a critical issue in understanding, which I guess gets to a bigger point as a franchisor. The non-negotiable items are typically items where you don't want disparate treatment among franchisees, right? And that could apply to territory structures. That could influence your item 19. That could influence how well someone performs. And it could influence how a franchisee attorney tries to attack your franchise system, whether legitimately or not. They don't really care. They'll look for the disparity. Their brand development fund fees, so you want to keep that uniform treatment. Kelley, on the FDD reality side here, any disconnects or advice on operational elements, like on franchisee non-compliance, if it's a brick and mortar, on-site inspections, and building out that regimen and that system for maintaining compliance? Because we see a lot of emerging brands, they're creating this as they go forward.
Yeah, I think that is an issue for a lot of people. It certainly was for me. And it's, as a franchisor, I think the best solution is be as vague as possible and keep referencing your ops manual whenever you can for compliance issues, for up-to-date, like this is our up-to-date compliance standard. This similar brand, are having a hard time holding a whole group of their franchisees responsible for some compliance issues, because their version of the franchise agreement clearly defined what what was considered non-compliance, and that list couldn't grow. It didn't say, the now current compliance issues. Same with audits. I've seen FDDs that say, we will only do an annual audit. Well, what if you need to check that location more than once a year? I think, there's opportunities, especially as I mentioned early on, when you're working with the right legal team, to have more conversation. Your legal team's always going to tell you what the best legal structure is and what, they typically do. But if you know that for your brand, you need more opportunities for audits, you need more opportunity to add in what might be a significant compliance issue for your brand, to feel like you do have a voice and you can, talk about that and get those put in your agreement. Same with cure periods. I got bit quite a few times with some really generous cure periods that weren't really aligned with the reality of us being able to act on some things we needed to act on.
So that's interesting, right? Because you don't want to fall into a legal loop where violation, cure, violation, cure. Were those the type of situations you'd run into, Kelley?
It was. And, the franchisees after a while know that how long their cure period is. So they can violate and then they have 6 months to cure. Well, in the meantime, they're continuing to violate and other franchisees are seeing those violations. But those were the cure periods we had defined in their franchise agreements. So as a franchisor, you can really handcuff yourself without realizing it in a lot of ways. by not really understanding what you're defining as compliance issues and what rights you're giving yourself to act on those.
I think those are critical takeaways, right? So, right, because you have the default type issues, and then we have compliance. Like, how do we create compliance and avoid non-compliance issues? So when we're working with our clients, I'm like, the goal is not to send a default notice, right, that triggers cure. But we have to do it sometimes. We send operational notices. That's why I do like, as part of our structure and recommendations, it's not only a default or a violation where we could send a default notice, we could also assess non-compliance fees, right? So all of a sudden, yeah, I may have X number of time to cure my default, but I'm getting assessed these fees, and I don't want to be doing that.
Right.
So I think that's an important factor. The other thing, getting to your other points, Kelley, operations manual, financial reporting, that becomes cadence, right? A good FDD is going to say, we could request monthly reports or monthly P&Ls or whatever. But I think the mistake that happens is too many franchisors don't do that on a consistent basis. And so franchisees build an expectation they don't need to do it, and then you start chasing them. Of course, this could all be cured, but that's another point of understand what your FDD and franchise agreement says and make a conscious decision. If it says you can request it monthly, but you're deciding, well, we're just going to do it quarterly, that's fine, but make that decision and then communicate it, right, to your franchisees. Explain, hey, part of being in a system is benchmarking and data. And so every quarter or every month, you're going to complete this information, or we're going to pull this information. I think that's critical. And then also, such a fundamental gets to operations manual, which is make it a living and breathing document, playbooks, and get beyond just sitting there. Even now, silly things like, it's not silly. So for one of the changes we're making in 2026 FDDs have to do with AI and defining what AI is, incorporating it as part of the confidentiality structure. And then for our clients, we're going to have conversations of, hey, you need to update your operations manual to restrict and make franchisees know part of your confidentiality framework is you can't just upload our operations manual to an AI device, right? And things like that. So it definitely changes. Kelley, so as we wrap up, and if anyone has any questions, let us know. But any final words before we kick off for the weekend here?
Yeah, learn your franchise agreement if you don't already know it. Number one, spend the time to go through it. Second, make sure your team understands the franchise agreement too. I think that's something I learned, didn't figure out early enough on. It was just as important that my ops team knew that FDD inside and out as I did, because they're the ones holding people to it. So make sure they understand it. And most importantly, number three, treat your first franchisee like you would treat your 50th. Same rules right from the beginning. It's going to make your life a whole lot easier.
That's killer. That last point's incredible advice, Kelley. Everyone, thanks for joining us. And Kelley, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.